I thought, look, Rob, you and I, over the years, we've been part of many change management projects, both here and at previous companies. So I thought we'd sit down today, have a chat and just discuss our learnings from those projects. So I've been looking into it, doing some research, and from what I can find, 34% of change management initiatives end in failure. That's obviously quite an alarming statistic. Based on your experiences and your learnings, what is crucial at the start of any of these kind of projects to get right from the get-go?
I think it's all based on the approach. So you can look at this a number of ways. So some companies will just crack on with the gung-ho approach. Somebody will decide somewhere that they need to make a change and they'll just try and jump straight into it. And those are usually the ones that end in failure because they've not been thought through at the outset as to why they're doing it or what they're doing it for. So the second way of looking at it is to come up with a bit of a plan and an approach, and that might be done internally. So you might pull together a bit of a team, you might take different stakeholders from different parts of the business, get them in a room and say, okay, why are we doing this? And at the end of that process, you then produce some kind of document that you would then use to kick up to management and explain, why we're doing it. Or the third way is you could bring in an external consultant, or you could look at potential software suppliers who would do this sort of thing, bring them involved, get them to look at it. And they can offer like an independent eye, and they can also offer that sense of saying, well, this is how other businesses do it. Because you can sometimes get locked into, this is the way we've always done it, which is kind of the bane of every business analysis is to hear, this is the way we've always done it, we can't possibly change. And it's having that mindset open to change is what you definitely need at the start.
Absolutely. And from your experience of those three approaches, which tends to increase or improve the likelihood of the project being a success?
I always think it's the third approach because it produces that balance between gathering information from internal stakeholders and getting their understanding of what they need, but also getting that third party to structure the project and also bring in their experience of what needs to be done and why it needs to be done. So I think that tends to be the most successful way. If you don't have the budget for that or you don't have the time for that, then obviously you can do it using internal people, but you have to do that at the start. If you don't do that at the start, you're probably going to end up being one of those 34% that fail.
So that statistic, Rob, was obviously a bit of a shock for me. What did you're at the cold face of it, you're involved in these projects on a day-to-day basis. So what did you think when you heard that statistic?
To be honest, I'm not that surprised because I think I've seen a lot of projects where they start out with that gung-ho approach. So there's definitely a few in our industry where you've seen they've looked at other bits of software and they've just jumped straight into it. There's been no starting out analysis phase, and often sometimes it can just be one business unit or one small part of the business decides we have this problem, so we're going to try and solve it, and they will just jump straight into trying to solve it. And often what they'll do is they'll look for the solution. They won't understand the need or why they need it. They will just jump straight into, I think there's this bit of software out there that can help me. I'm just going to go and buy it and jump straight into it. And then they then tend to find that, oh, well, actually, yeah, that software is great for the finance department, but all of a sudden there's effects in the payroll department, there's effects in the sales department. It's not been thought out as a holistic project with the whole team, and there might not be enough budget for it, so you can suddenly realize, well, actually, we need to build all these new features into the software because it doesn't have them, and now we don't have the budget to start it, but we've already migrated some of the business onto this, so now we're stuck with some of the business running the new solution, some of the business still on the old solution, and now we can't easily transition out of it because it just wasn't thought through at the start.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, from our perspective and from our learnings, as you say, we've probably been fortunate at My Digital that we've seen more successes than failures. But one of the big learnings, I think, from our experience is absolutely internal communication. Like you were just saying, it's not just individual people or units taking on a project and running with it. It's communicating across the organisation and ensuring that every stakeholder is part of that journey. But we've also noticed that those clients or potential clients that take us on the journey as early as possible increases the likelihood of success. So again, talking through all of the internal processes, all of the required outcomes and solutions from that early phase, sharing that with us increases the likelihood of success, or sharing that, should I say, sorry, with any software supplier that they want to work.
Absolutely, because it helps if you explain all your internal processes to your software supplier before you start. You allow them to understand well, this is how we work at the moment. And they can map out that business process and say, well, these are how all the systems interact. This is how the contractor gets from, not even existing in your system all the way to being paid and then eventually P45. And if you can see that journey, you can then start to pick out, well, how does this data point get from here to here? How do you run the payroll at 4 o'clock on a Thursday? What do you do if you haven't got hours for this person? How do you handle the situation? And it starts to bring out more requirements. It starts to bring out, it often brings in more stakeholders. You start to realize, oh, actually, there's this person, over here, there's Karen in accounts, and she's, reconciling something, and no one knows what she's reconciling or why she's reconciling it. And I think it's useful both for making sure that you cover all the parts of the process, as well as ensuring that you handle the change management part, because people are scared of change, particularly some of your operators. They've been working in a certain way for maybe 10, 15 years, and you're asking them to come into work and do something different, and that can be quite scary. So if you're not bringing them on the journey with you, and you're just saying to them at the end, right, on Monday you're using a new system, it's incredibly stressful. They're likely to, throw up barriers, throw up reasons as to why they can't use it. They won't understand. If you brought them on that journey with you, they will be, welcoming. They'll be pushing you. They'll be saying, okay, well, when are we going live with this great new piece of software? Because it's going to save me hours and hours, and I don't have to do any more of that manual work anymore. So it's definitely an important part of communication. So we've talked a lot about how we need to consider what the internal stakeholders need and making sure we've got that communication. But there's obviously another massively important group we need to consider, which is our external stakeholders.
Absolutely. And I think in the market that we operate in specifically, we're quite unique in the sense of having two customer bases. So the clients that we work with have got agencies, recruitment agencies, and then clients that they have to service and think about in a project like this. But they've also got contractors and temporary workers. So any sort of project that they undertake needs to consider all customer sets and the impact that a change in software will have on them. Because with customers, you've got to think of things like sales invoices in our world. Will they be in a different format? Will there need to be communications up the supply chain so that people understand that there will be changes? And then potentially more importantly, you've got the contractors. Now, pay is an emotive subject at the best of times. Migrating to a completely new payroll engine, as we discussed statistically, is fraught with risk. If that were to go wrong, the impacts on that customer base of contractors could be vast. It could be, so detrimental to the business that there could be no business left. So those two external stakeholders need to be considered in a project like this. And I'd imagine if you are migrating to a new provider, they should have ample experience in communicating to both customer sets. So again, to your point earlier about communication with potential suppliers, I would advise people to lean on their suppliers for those communications with external customers. So yeah, we've talked about a couple of different phases, and I think at this point it is fair to say that probably if the business case is enticing enough or sufficient enough internally, it's probably now the time to look at the market and to look at potential suppliers. So again, just leaning in your experience, would you advise that people look at a single supplier and go down that route, or do you think it's worth looking at 4 or 5? What do you think is the optimum?
I think you've definitely got to look at the market. I think you've got to come up with an initial shortlist. So you might just do that just using like internet research, just speaking to people that you know, experience of what other systems you've used. And then you might then cut that down to 3 or 4 maybe. And then you'd start seriously talking to those 3 or 4, trying to get software demos, trying to get commercials, trying to get an understanding of how does the solution work, and then start to bring them into the process and say, well, starting to imagine, well, what is the new world going to look like once this software is in, and is this software going to be fit for what I'm trying to achieve? Yeah. So you've still always got to go back to that checklist that you started out with and said, well, this is why I'm moving. And then as you look at each supplier, you're kind of ticking off on that checklist. And then you will also be naturally adding on some cons. You'll be going, well, actually, this new bit of software doesn't necessarily do some bits that I'm used to. Yeah. But at the end of the process, you kind of got to weigh up those pros and cons, because you're never going to find a solution that's going to be a perfect fit. You're trying to find something that is, 90% of what you need. Because as long as overall you're saving time, there are always going to be little bits that don't quite fit. And I think you really got to understand that. I think the other really important thing to consider when you're choosing your suppliers is how they're going to engage with you. You know, is it just going to be here's the software, off you go, or are they going to try and build a proper partnership with you, understand your business, what you need, and you know what are the support times like? Are they constantly available to help you? You know, how is the implementation process going to look like, and what is it going to look like after go live? You know, you're going to have regular support, or you're going to be sort of, you know, shoved in a corner somewhere where you get a 6 monthly call and that's it. So I think you've got to both understand the software and the service aspect that is going to come with that.
Yeah, and I think two other big areas of consideration, probably focusing on our sector now. I mean, you know, the sector has been unfortunately heavily attacked from a cyber perspective over the past few years. So I think doing proper due diligence on suppliers in terms of their security accreditations and their seriousness, because again, with it being business critical software, were there a cyber attack on your new potential supplier, then that would be, you know, again, detrimental to your actual business model. So considering and talking openly to your supplier about what they do from a cybersecurity perspective, and also something I know that we do as a business when we look for new suppliers, we do financial due diligence. So we're always ensuring that we are, you know, again, in our market, it is a significant investment in terms of financial resources. So ensuring that that investment is going to be a long-term one, and then that business is going to still be around by the next financial year, for example. So yeah, you can have a look on Companies House, look at maybe even abbreviated accounts, sometimes full sets of accounts, and just truly understanding the financial state of play. And we're always really honest with our potential customers, maybe too honest. We'll show them our revenues, we'll show them the ins and outs of our companies, because as much of a cliche as it is, we do truly want a partnership with these people and their businesses. So we're happy to put all our cards on the table and talk through everything with them. So yeah, I think in terms of the change management projects internally, any documentation that our client base do, because of the market that we work in, there tend to be a lot of companies that are run by accountants or those with some experience in the accountancy world. So they are numbers people. They like to see true understanding of time, the cost attributed to that time in terms of their current processes, and what the new world could look like, both in terms of any revenues that they're committed to, but also any time savings and what that translates to in terms of financials. So that is something that we've been part of with our clients, again, through the BA phase, understanding the cost of our software, but also the time savings that it can deliver. And then we can easily translate with them that into pounds and pence savings. So that is usually a big part of, when we're talking to bigger clients, a big part of what they do.
Yeah, and it's absolutely useful to have that document, you know, to prove the benefit. And as you say, you know, a lot of customers will need that as part of their sign-off process. And I think it is good to try and get an understanding of that sign-off process before you even sort of really get into producing that document, because it will help you understand what needs to go in that document, as well as also thinking about, you know, how long is the sign-off process going to take? What stakeholders do I need to get involved? And you can sort of start to give them a heads up. You know, we're looking at doing this. Can this be an item on the next board meeting next month? And then get an idea as well, you know, how long is it going to take to get this signed off? Because you might have a go live date to say, I want to go live for the start of the new tax year, but it might take the board 3 months to sign it off. So then, you know, you've got to be thinking about it much earlier than you might otherwise have to if it's just, you know, a one-man band and you can sign it off yourself tomorrow. So thinking about that sign-off process and what it looks like, I think, is very important, and building that into your document and whatever it is you're producing to kick up to the board to get that approval.
I agree, and we've obviously seen it both cases, or all different size businesses that we operate with. We work with owner-operated businesses where they make a decision in a couple of weeks and they implement it and they tell their staff about it, and they've not taken on that journey with them. We're also fortunate enough to work with big PLCs where we go through big, long procurement cycles, rightly so, where they're doing due diligence on every aspect of our business. But those 34% of successful projects, it's the communication early doors. It's telling your potential suppliers that this is, well, A, these are my expectations as a customer in terms of timescales, and B, these are my processes. Because what it then allows us as a supplier to do is to say, well, they're your timescales, but, you know, based on our experience and the size and complexities of your business, that project's actually going to take 8 to 12 weeks rather than 4 to 6. So, at the point that we talked on earlier, communication from the start, communicating with suppliers, stakeholders, customers, everybody in the project, so that the likelihood of success increases. So assuming that all of that has gone through all the processes and the steps that we've talked about so far, and not forgetting the quite crucial part of contract signature with the chosen supplier, talk to us a little bit, Rob, about your experience around implementations. So obviously we can give references to our sector, but data migration, training, all that kind of stuff. What's your advice and experience?
The first point is always data. So it's making sure you've got access to that data. How quickly can you get that data out of your system? Because whatever system you're into, there's data. And then understanding how does that get into the new system, planning that in. We usually do a couple of test runs to make sure, yeah, okay, we can get these data points. We know we've got them. We can get them in. It produces the right output. Doing all that sort of stuff is pretty critical. It was in the first part of the implementation phase. Once you've done that and you've kind of got some test data in your system, that's when you can start planning in your training, making sure you've identified all the right people for the relevant bits of training. You get them in the sessions, you get them to understand the system. That's their opportunity to ask all the questions, flush out any last minute requirements that still haven't quite been found in the earlier business analysis phase. And then you start planning towards go live. So you pick a date, you prepare your communications, both internally and externally. If your clients have got to log into a different system after the date, you want to make sure they know exactly what's going to happen and when. And then you do the actual go live. And naturally, with any go live, there will always be some unexpected things that come out, and as long as you're prepared for that unexpected, and as long as you've put all the upfront effort in to make sure that you've covered 95% of what you needed to, you can just handle that. You have to handle that 5% on the first few days, and that's ideal when you want to have a supplier that you've got a partnership with who can jump in, help you, give you that little bit of extra training that you needed, and get you through that first week. And after then, you should hope that it could be plain sailing.
Absolutely. And I think one of the questions that I always get early on in any sales process with a client, it tends to be around that initial support, because clients, again, I've probably mentioned it a few times, it's business critical software that we sell. If it goes wrong, their business goes wrong. So people are rightly quite cautious about any sort of migration, and they always want to know, is there any set process or timeline for an implementation and a data migration? And there isn't a hard and fast rule. It is all dictated by, like you say, access to data, availability of the people at the client and at the software supplier, and then also what happens during that go live, because unfortunately the nature of any software is there will always be challenges that present themselves. So it's about, as you say, how those challenges are handled. But for me, one of the big learnings and the big points that needs to be considered when migrating in our market, people are always really cautious about the volume of data that they've got. So our clients on average deal with 1,500 to 2,000 payments a week. That is a lot of crucial and, more importantly, moving data. So people are hesitant about that. What would you say to them about that, the volume of data, and the fact that some of that data is static, some of that data is moving, so it's almost two different data sets?
Yeah, it is kind of. You'd want to ideally try and get the static data out as soon as you can. Once you know it's not going to change, get it out, get it in your new system, get it ready. Your transactional data, you can always test it. Even though it's going to change, you can test that you can get it out, you get it, and you can get it into your new system. And then, you plan for it. You work out, this is the day that I'm going to do it. You give yourself plenty of time. You don't really want to be trying to do it during the middle of a key payroll day or a key activity day. You want to be doing it at the end of the week on a Friday. Yeah, you might have to put in a bit of time at the weekend, but it's better to try and do it then when you've got that available sort of window for getting the data out and getting it into your new software, rather than trying to do it during the middle of key processing. And then once it's in there, it's then just about validating it back. Have I actually got the data in there that I wanted to get in there?
Yeah, and test running, I think you covered it off, but doing the parallel runs is another crucial part of, I suppose, any software migration, but especially the market that we work in with pay data. I know it's something that we're constantly hearing people in the office doing test runs with people. What's your experience or advice around that side of things?
Yeah, I think it's really good to do at least one test run. It can be difficult to do the whole parallel run, so sometimes people get a bit hung up on I need to do everything in the new system that I'm doing in my old system. Practically you're giving yourself double the amount of work. The key thing to really do is just select samples of people that fit certain bits of criteria. So you're running 10% of whatever it is, your volume or your scenarios, you're running them in your new system as well as your old system. Because there's no point if you've got 100 people and they're all running the same way, you only really need to run one or two of them. You don't have to run all of them because they're going to produce all the same results. It's just about finding the scenarios and make sure you run those scenarios through and then cross-compare the results. And as long as you're getting the same result, you know that it's going to work.
I think you'll agree with me, Rob. One of the most important phases of any change management project is probably post-implementation, post-go-live evaluation. As we've said, there will be challenges, but again, talk to us, what's your experience?
Yeah, so I think as long as at the start of the process you've built that document, understanding why you're making that change, you've got something quite easy at the end of the process to say, okay, have we achieved what we actually wanted to achieve? Have we saved the time we wanted to save? Have we improved these processes? Have we got into these new markets we want to get into? Whatever, you should be able to build that. And you should also at the same time evaluate, what hasn't quite worked, what things have not quite gone as you've expected, where are there gaps that perhaps still need to be filled, and you can produce that into some kind of document to say, and it becomes a bit of a working document because you can't just sort of stop and end your change. You've got to keep looking at, well, what's the next change you need to make? What are the next things we need to improve on, and keep building it as a continuous process. Working with your software supplier to try and constantly improve.
I was just going to make that point. I think, again, where we've seen projects that have been successful, we've been part of those post-go-live evaluations. So, and again, your software supplier will have feedback as to what or why they think things have happened. So it's always valuable listening to them and listening to their input as to what's happened, absolutely. So we've obviously got a lot of experience. As I said, we've been fortunate enough to be part of nearly 90 change management projects. Most of them, a lot higher proportion than 34% of those have been successful. And I think that we're fortunate, as I say, to have been part of so many projects, and we've gained so much experience from all of those individual projects. It's been nearly 90 different software providers, different industries, different size, scales and complexities of projects. So if you and I would have sat here 5 years ago and had this conversation, we'd probably have been guessing about a lot of the answers that we've been giving. But because of the exposure that we've had to all those different implementations, you and I are now a lot wiser. So hopefully it's been valuable to share that with the audience today. And hopefully you can get a flavour for the fact that we are happy to give advice and our expertise and experience to people that are working both in the industry and not in the industry. So if we can help anybody out there at all, if people want to get in touch and learn a little bit more about potentially migrating to My Digital or just migrating away from their existing provider to another, more than happy to talk. Our contact details will be available underneath the video.